The room was silent. Only the soft beeping of machines filled the air. Cold white lights hung from the ceiling, making the place feel less like a hospital and more like a prison. The smell of metal and medicine was strong, sharp, and heavy. On the bed, a young alien woman lay still, her skin pale, her breath weak, her eyes half closed. She was fighting to stay alive, but her strength was fading fast. Around her stood a group of alien doctors, tall, thin, and dressed in silver robes. They looked down at her, their faces calm but empty of care. One doctor touched a glowing screen beside her bed. Numbers and signals moved quickly. He shook his head. No chance, he whispered in his language. Another doctor sighed. Her condition is beyond us, no cure, no hope. They spoke in low voices as if she could not hear them, but she did. Every word cut deep into her heart. The doctors wrote their final notes, tapping the glowing tablets in their hands. Their voices were cold, their movements sharp. To them, she was only a failed case, another lost patient. No one showed sadness, no one tried to comfort her. They turned away, one by one, leaving her to the machines. The last doctor paused at the door, his shadow long against the wall. He looked back only for a second, then whispered, "It is done," and left. The heavy doors closed with a deep sound echoing in the silent room. The alien woman's eyes filled with tears. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. She had no family here, no friends, no one who would stay at her side. The doctors were her only chance, and they had given up. She felt the weight of the silence pressing down on her chest. The beeping machine was the only voice in the room now. Beep, beep, slow and steady. Each sound reminded her that time was slipping away. Her thoughts were filled with fear. Why had they left her? Was her life worth nothing to them? Was she so weak that even her own people would not fight for her? She tried to raise her hand, but it fell back onto the bed like a stone. Her strength was gone, her body felt like ice. The darkness at the edges of her vision grew stronger. She thought this was the end. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, she could not tell. The lights above buzzed, shadows stretched across the walls. Her heart beat slow, heavy, painful. She whispered in her mind, "Is this how it ends? Alone, forgotten?" Her tears rolled down her cheek, warm against her cold skin. No answer came, no comfort, only the steady machine keeping her alive. Then, something changed. A sound, faint but clear. Footsteps, not the quick steps of the doctors, but slower, heavier, different. She opened her eyes a little, struggling to focus. The door hissed open with a quiet breath. A figure entered, not tall like the doctors, not thin like them. It was a human. He was dressed in simple clothes, not shining silver robes. His hands carried no glowing tablet, only a small bag of tools. He looked ordinary, his face tired, his steps unsure, but his eyes were alive, sharp, and filled with something the doctors never had. Concern. He stopped by her bed, looked at her weak form, and frowned. "Why is she alone?" he whispered, almost to himself. He touched the screen, reading the alien numbers, his face hardening. "They left her. They gave up," he said softly. His voice carried shock but also anger. The woman's lips moved, no sound came, but he leaned closer. "Don't worry, I see you. You're not alone now." She stared at him with weak eyes, confused but also hopeful. She had never seen a human so close, never thought one would stand at her side. The doctors had all turned away, but this human stayed. He did not leave, he did not fear. He simply looked at her as if she was more than just a failed patient, as if she was someone worth saving. He sat down on the chair beside her bed. The machines hummed, the lights flickered. He reached out, gently adjusting the blanket over her fragile body. "Stay with me," he whispered. "I will not leave you. Not like they did." His words were simple, but they carried warmth. a warmth she had not felt in a long time in her weak heart. A spark of hope flickered, small, fragile, but real. The doctors had left her in cold silence, but now one human had entered, and in that moment the cold room no longer felt empty. It felt alive again, filled with the possibility of something different, something stronger than machines or cold science. It felt like the beginning of a fight. A fight not for numbers, not for records, but for life. Her life. And though her eyes closed once more, her heart whispered to her, "This is not the end. Not yet." The room stayed quiet. Machines kept beeping, and the alien girl lay between life and death. Her breath was shallow, her body weak, her hope nearly gone. But the human who had stepped inside did not walk away. He stood still for a moment, listening to the cold silence, and then he took a slow breath. His name was Daniel, a simple worker in the alien hospital. He was not a doctor, not a healer, just a technician fixing machines and checking wires. To the alien staff, he was unimportant, someone who cleaned tools and carried supplies. But to the girl lying in the bed, he was now the only one who stayed. Daniel looked around the room. Everything was strange to him, glowing screens with alien symbols, tall silver machines that hummed with energy. He could not read their language, but he understood enough. The red lines on the screen meant danger. The falling numbers meant she was slipping away, and yet the doctors had left her as if her life had no value. He pulled a chair closer to the bed, sitting down beside her. Her eyes were half closed, but she was watching him with weak curiosity. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Daniel leaned closer. "Don't try to talk," he whispered. "Save your strength. I'm here now." Her heart beat a little faster at his words. The machine beside her showed it. Daniel smiled softly, surprised that she reacted. "You heard me, didn't you?" he said gently. "That means you're still fighting." His voice was not cold like the doctor's. It was warm, full of life. And in that warmth, the alien girl felt something new, something she thought was gone. Hope. Daniel placed his bag of tools on the floor. He had no medicine, no knowledge of alien biology. But he had something else, the stubbornness of a human heart. He checked. Her blanket tucked it around her carefully. Her skin was icy cold, and he rubbed her hands lightly, trying to bring warmth back. "Your people gave up," he whispered. "But I won't." The girl blinked slowly, as if telling him she understood. Daniel felt anger burning inside him. Why would doctors, trained to save lives, walk away? Why would they leave her alone to die? It went against everything he believed in. He stood and walked to the sink in the corner. The water was cool. He filled a cup and brought it to her lips. "Just a little," he said softly, helping her sip. She coughed weakly but swallowed. Her body shivered, but Daniel saw color return faintly to her face. It was a small victory, but it mattered. "See?" he whispered with a smile. "You can fight. You're stronger than they think." She blinked again, her eyes glistening with weak tears. No one had spoken to her with such kindness before, not since she arrived here. To the doctor she was a case. To Daniel she was a person. That difference gave her strength. Hours passed slowly. Daniel stayed by her side, checking the machines, wiping sweat from her forehead. He talked quietly, telling her stories of Earth, of blue skies, green forests, and oceans that stretched forever. Even if she did not understand every word, his voice carried warmth, and that warmth filled the cold, empty room. "On Earth," he said softly, "we never leave someone alone in the dark. We always try, no matter how small the chance." His eyes grew hard. "I don't care if they punish me. You will not die alone. Not while I'm here." The girl stirred faintly. Her weak hand moved a little. Her fingers brushed against his. Daniel froze, then gently held her hand. Her grip was soft, almost weightless. But it was real. Her eyes opened wider for a moment, and in them he saw something shining. It was not just pain, it was trust. For the first time since her sickness began, she did not feel abandoned. For the first time, she believed maybe she could survive. Not because of medicine, not because of machines, but because one human cared enough to fight for her. The door hissed open again, and Daniel quickly turned. Another alien doctor stepped in, tall and cold. He frowned when he saw the human sitting beside the girl. "What are you doing here?" the doctor asked sharply, his voice like ice. "You have no permission. She is already lost." Daniel stood, his eyes blazing. "She's not lost," he said firmly. "She's alive. She's fighting, and I'll help her." The doctor shook his head. "Foolish human, your kind does not understand. Leave her, or you will face punishment." Daniel clenched his fists, but did not move away. "Then punish me," he said in a steady voice. "Because I won't walk out that door, not while she's still breathing." The doctor glared at him for a long moment, then turned and left, muttering in anger. The door closed again, leaving Daniel and the girl in silence once more. But this silence was no longer hopeless. It was filled with determination. Daniel sat again, holding her fragile hand. "Don't worry," he whispered. "They may give up, but I never will." The girl's lips curved faintly, the shadow of a smile, and Daniel knew she believed him. The night inside the hospital was long, cold, and quiet. Machines hummed softly, casting pale blue light across the room. Daniel sat by the alien girl's bed, his head heavy but his spirit unshaken. He had promised not to leave her, and he meant every word. The girl lay weak, her body trembling now and then. Her breaths came slowly, but they were steady. She opened her eyes at times, catching glimpses of the strange human who stayed beside her. In her world, humans were outsiders, not trusted, often ignored. Yet here was one human, watching over her when even her own people had abandoned her. Daniel leaned closer, his voice soft. "I know you don't understand all my words," he said, "but I believe you can feel what I mean." His tone was gentle, calm, carrying warmth in every sound. The girl's heart responded to it, beating a little faster. The machine beside her beeped with new life. Daniel smiled. "That's it? Hold on, you're still here." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small object. It was not a medical tool, but something simple, a tiny light cube from Earth. When he pressed it, the cube glowed softly, shifting colors from blue to green to gold. The girl's tired eyes widened, her gaze fixed on the glowing cube. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. Daniel placed the cube gently in her hand, guiding her fingers around it. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he whispered. Her eyes glistened with weak tears, not of pain, but of wonder. That small light broke the darkness that had surrounded her. It reminded her of life, of hope, of something beyond suffering. Daniel watched as she clutched the light cube. Though her grip was fragile, the will inside her seemed stronger. "You see," Daniel said softly, "you're not just surviving, you're living, even if it's just a little." Hours passed, but he never left her side. He told her stories in simple words, stories of Earth and its people. He described children running under bright skies, families laughing by the sea. He told her about music, about how humans sang when they were happy or sad. She listened with half-closed eyes, but her heart drank in every word. His voice was like medicine, different from the cold commands of the doctors. It gave her strength, not in her body, but in her spirit. At one moment she raised her hand weakly. Her fingers brushed against Daniel's wrist. He froze, then gently held her hand, careful not to hurt her fragile skin. Her eyes met his. Tired yet filled with silent meaning, Daniel whispered, "I understand. You don't want me to stop." And so he kept talking, his words weaving a bridge between them. The bond grew slowly, fragile like glass but real. It was not built on language but on feeling. A human and an alien. Two lives that were never meant to cross, now tied by survival, Daniel thought to himself. She needs more than medicine. She needs someone to believe. in her and in that moment. He knew he would not only fight for her life, he would fight to show her she mattered. But outside, the hospital halls were not quiet. Whispers spread among the alien staff, the human worker who refused to obey, the foolish man who sat with the dying girl. Some mocked him, some were angry. "Why does he waste his time?" one said. "She is beyond saving." Another added. But none of them dared to stop him again. Perhaps deep inside, even they feared he might succeed, and if he did, it would expose their failure. Back in the room, Daniel noticed her breathing grow a little easier. He gave her sips of water when she stirred. He cooled her forehead with a damp cloth. Each small act seemed unimportant, but together they created a rhythm of care. The girl was no longer abandoned. She was no longer alone. As the night grew deeper, Daniel spoke again. "On Earth we have a saying," he whispered. "Where there is life, there is hope." He smiled at her softly. "You still breathe, you still fight, so I will fight with you." Her eyes closed, but not in despair. Her chest rose and fell with a more steady rhythm. Sleep took her gently, safe under the watch of the strange human. Daniel leaned back in the chair, exhausted but alert. His eyes scanned the machines, the wires, the pale face of the girl. Every sign told him she was fragile, her life hanging on a thin thread. But he had seen something more, something the doctors ignored. He had seen the spark of will in her eyes, and that spark was enough for him to keep going. He whispered one last time before resting his head against the wall. "You're not just a patient. You're a person, and I will not let you go." The words floated in the quiet room, the fragile bond between them glowing brighter than the machines. For the first time, she was not only surviving, she was being seen, truly seen, by one who refused to let her fade into the dark. The morning light slipped through the tall windows of the alien hospital. Cold rays touched the girl's face as the machines kept their steady hum. Her body was still weak, but something had changed in her eyes. She was no longer only waiting for death. She was waiting for Daniel. The human sat beside her again, tired but determined. He had not left her. Through the long night, he looked worn, dark circles under his eyes, but his spirit was strong. When she opened her eyes and saw him still there, she felt a strange calm. He smiled faintly. "Good morning," he whispered, as if speaking to an old friend. The girl tried to speak, but her voice was only a broken whisper. Daniel leaned closer, straining to hear. Her lips formed one word, shaky but clear. "Why?" Daniel paused, then nodded slowly. "You ask why I stay," he said softly. "Because life is worth fighting, for no matter whose it is." She looked at him with wide eyes, not understanding everything, but understanding enough. Her heart beat faster, her fragile body reacting to his words. For so long she had been treated as a hopeless case, but now one person treated her as someone worth saving. That gave her strength, hidden deep inside her, waiting to rise. Daniel pulled out his small bag again. He had no alien medicine, no advanced cures, but he had simple things: clean cloth, water, dried food from his own supplies. He placed a little water on her lips, careful not to choke her. He whispered encouragement. "One sip at a time. You're stronger than you know." She obeyed, weakly swallowing. And for the first time in days, her throat no longer burned with thirst. Hours passed. Daniel worked with patience. He used warm water to clean her skin. He gave her tiny pieces of his own food, crushed into soft paste. She ate little, but it was enough to keep her alive. Her eyes began to glow faintly with energy. Her breathing, once shallow, grew more steady, but the doctors mocked him from afar. They whispered in the halls, "The human wastes his time." Another scoffed, "He is only delaying death." Yet none of them came back to help. They had abandoned her completely, and now only Daniel's stubborn will stood against their judgment. Daniel ignored them. He remembered his childhood on Earth, how his grandmother had taught him simple remedies. She used herbs, warm broth, and above all, care. She had said, "Sometimes healing comes not from medicine but from love and patience." Daniel now saw those words come alive before his eyes. The girl stirred, opening her mouth again. This time her voice was stronger, though still faint. She whispered, a single word, one that Daniel did not expect. "Live." His heart skipped. He smiled and nodded. "Yes," he said firmly. "Live. That's what we'll do." Her fingers moved slightly, reaching toward the cube of light he had given her the night before. It still glowed faintly in her hand, shifting colors. Daniel helped her hold it. The glow reflected in her eyes, showing not weakness, but a spark of determination. The fragile bond between them was turning into something stronger. Later, when she grew tired, Daniel looked at the machines. The numbers were still dangerous, but they had slowed their fall. She was no longer sinking as fast. It was a tiny victory, but it filled him with pride. He whispered to her as she slept, "You are stronger than they believe. You just needed someone to see it." But danger was never far. Two alien staff entered quietly, their voices sharp. "You cannot do this," one said. "She is not your responsibility." Daniel stood, his voice calm but firm. "She is my responsibility because I chose to stay." The staff glared. "If the council finds out, you will be punished." Daniel stepped closer, his jaw tight. "Then let them punish me, but I will not abandon her." The staff hesitated, then left, muttering. They knew his resolve was unbreakable. Daniel turned back to the girl. Her eyes were half open. She had heard everything. A tear rolled down her cheek, but it was not from sadness. It was from something new, something she had never felt before. "Trust," she whispered faintly. "You stay." Daniel nodded, his voice gentle. "Always." The hidden strength inside her began to grow. Every word, every small act of care built a wall between her and death. It was fragile, but it was real. Daniel saw her as more than a patient. She saw him as more than a stranger. Together they created a bond that gave life new meaning. As night came again, Daniel sat beside her, his hand resting over hers. The machines hummed, the light cube glowed. Her breaths were slow but steady. In the silence, a new promise filled the air. A promise that no matter how hopeless things seemed, there was always hidden strength waiting to rise. And though the doctors outside still whispered of her death, inside the room, Daniel and the girl whispered of life. Her eyes closed in rest, her hand still holding his, and in that fragile touch a future no one believed in had begun to take shape. The days inside the alien hospital grew tense. Daniel's quiet fight to keep the girl alive did not stay hidden for long. Whispers turned into open arguments, and soon the staff began to watch him closely. They did not understand why a human, a worker with no medical rank, refused to obey. To them, he was crossing lines, breaking rules, and challenging their authority. But Daniel did not care about rules. He only cared about the fragile girl whose life was slowly coming back. Every small sign of progress gave him strength. Her voice was still weak, but now she could whisper single words. Her hands, once limp and cold, could now grip his fingers with soft pressure. It was proof that she was not gone. Proof that their bond was keeping her alive. One evening, as Daniel fed her a little broth he had made from his own food rations, the door slid open with force and 3 alien doctors entered. Their faces were cold, their robes shining under the pale lights. The leader stepped forward, his tall frame towering over Daniel. "This must stop," he said, his voice sharp. "You interfere with our work. You break the order." Daniel looked up calmly, but inside his chest anger burned. "She is alive," he said firmly. "She was dying when you left her, and now she breathes because I stayed." The doctor's eyes narrowed. "You delay what is natural. She was meant to end. You refuse to accept it." Daniel's hands tightened around the cup. "What you call natural, I call giving up," he said, his voice rising. "Where I come from, we fight until the last breath, and even then we do not leave someone to die alone." The doctors exchanged looks, whispers passing between them. One of them hissed, You shame us, human. But the girl stirred, her weak hand rising slowly. Her fingers trembled, but she pointed at Daniel, her eyes opening wider. Her lips moved, her faint voice escaping in a broken whisper. Stay. The room fell silent. The word cut through the air like fire. The doctor stared in disbelief. The patient they had left as hopeless was now speaking, choosing, fighting. Daniel leaned closer, holding her hand. I'm here, he whispered. I will not leave. The doctor stood frozen for a moment, then turned sharply. We will report this, the leader said. The council will hear of your disobedience. They left with heavy steps, the door slamming shut behind them. The silence that followed was thick, but Daniel only smiled faintly. You see, he whispered to the girl, they fear you, because you lived when they said you could not. Outside, tension grew. Alien staff argued in the halls, some mocking Daniel, others secretly wondering if he might be right. The idea that a human untrained in their science could succeed where they had failed was unthinkable. It threatened their pride, their order, their way of control. Inside the room, however, the bond grew stronger. Daniel began to teach her small words in his language. He pointed to himself. Daniel. Then to her, waiting for her to answer. Her lips moved slowly, weak but determined. Arya. Daniel smiled. Arya, he repeated softly. That's your name. For the first time, she was no longer only a patient. She was someone with a name, a voice, and a will. But the conflict outside soon reached a peak. Late one night, the door burst open again. 2 alien guards stepped inside, tall and armed with glowing staffs. You must leave, one ordered, by command of the council. Daniel stood quickly, shielding Arya with his body. She needs me, he said firmly. If I leave, she will die. The guards stepped closer, their eyes cold. It is not your choice, one replied. You are only human. Daniel's chest tightened with fury. Only human, he repeated, his voice steady but burning with anger. He pointed to Arya, who clutched the glowing cube in her hand. She speaks again, she eats again, she fights again, and none of it was because of you. He stepped forward, standing tall though smaller than the guards. If that is what it means to be only human, then I will carry it with pride. The guards hesitated, unsettled by his fire. For a moment no one moved. The hum of the machines filled the silence. Then Arya's faint voice broke through again. Her word was soft but filled with strength. Stay. The guards froze, their eyes wide. The girl who should have been silent, who should have been gone, was commanding them with one fragile word. Daniel's heart swelled. He turned to her and whispered, I will. The guards exchanged nervous looks, then turned without another word. The door closed, leaving Daniel and Arya alone once more. He sat down beside her, his hand over hers. You're not just surviving anymore, he said softly. You're fighting back, and they know it. Her weak smile appeared, the smallest curve of her lips, but to Daniel it was brighter than any light in the hospital. He knew the conflict was far from over. The council would not stay silent. The doctors would not forgive him. But none of it mattered, because Arya was alive. Her hidden strength had risen, and with every breath she took, the fight only grew stronger. That night, as machines hummed and shadows stretched across the walls, Daniel whispered, They fear you because you live, and they fear me because I refuse to leave. He tightened his grip on her fragile hand. Let them come, Arya. We will face them together. And though she was still weak, her eyes glowed with something new. Not only hope, but defiance. She had been abandoned once, but not again. Not while one human stood beside her. The hospital was no longer quiet. Rumors spread through its silver halls, whispers of the dying alien girl who now spoke, the human worker who defied the council, who refused to leave her side. Some staff laughed at the story, some feared it, and some kept watching in silence. But inside the small, cold room, the whispers outside did not matter. What mattered was that Arya was still alive. Daniel sat beside her bed, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but burning with determination. He had seen the council's threats. He had faced the guards. But nothing moved him away. Arya's hands, once too weak to lift, now gripped his lightly. Her voice, once silent, now whispered words of life. And with every breath she took, Daniel's resolve grew stronger. One morning, as pale light entered through the tall windows, Arya's lips parted, her voice trembling. "Why, you?" Daniel leaned close, hearing the broken words. "Why me?" he repeated softly. "Because no one else would stay, and because I couldn't walk away. Not from you." Arya's eyes glistened, the fragile bond between them glowing brighter. Daniel used his small tricks again. Warm water, bits of food, gentle words. He cleaned her forehead, adjusted her blanket, kept her body warm. These were not great miracles, but each act carried something the doctors had abandoned. Hope. And little by little, hope was stronger than despair. But outside, the council prepared action. The alien leaders gathered, speaking in cold voices. "The human interferes," one said. "He insults our order." Another added, "The girl was chosen for abandonment. She should not have survived." Whispers filled the chamber. But no, one wanted to face one truth. The human was succeeding and they had failed that evening. Daniel noticed something strange. Arya's breathing grew stronger, her skin warmer, her eyes brighter. He checked the machine beside her. The numbers were climbing slowly. For the first time, the line was not falling. It was rising. Daniel smiled, wide, his chest filled with relief. "You're healing," he whispered. "You're really healing." Arya tried to speak again, her words soft, broken, but clear. "You fight for me," she whispered. Daniel nodded quickly, holding her hand. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "I fight for you, and I'll never stop." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not of sorrow. They were tears of life, of being seen, of being cared for. Suddenly the door opened and the leader of the doctors entered with 2 guards. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Arya awake, her lips moving. "This is impossible," he muttered. "She should be gone." Daniel stood, his body between them and the bed. "She's alive," Daniel said firmly, "because she never gave up, and neither did I." The doctor shook his head, his voice bitter. "You don't understand, human. Our science said she was finished." Daniel's voice grew sharp. "Maybe your science failed because you forgot something. Healing is not just numbers, not just medicine. Sometimes it's the will to live. Sometimes it's not giving up on someone." The guards moved forward, but Arya's voice broke the air again. Weak but clear, she whispered. "He saved me." The words struck like thunder. The doctor froze, his eyes wide. The guards hesitated, their weapons lowered. The fragile girl they had abandoned now spoke against them, and the human they dismissed stood as her shield. Daniel reached down, helping Arya sit up a little. Her body trembled, but she leaned against him. Her eyes met the doctor's, glowing with defiance. "You left," she whispered slowly. "He stayed." The doctor's face turned pale, shame flickering. In his eyes he had no answer, because the truth was undeniable. Daniel's heart swelled. For the first time, Arya had not only survived, she had spoken her truth. Her strength was rising, hidden no longer, and that strength was brighter than any machine. The guards stepped back in silence. The doctor turned, away sharply, unable to face her words. The door closed behind them, leaving Daniel and Arya alone once again. The room was quiet, but the silence was no longer heavy with despair. It was filled with victory. Fragile but real, Daniel looked at her, his smile soft. "You did it," he whispered. "You told them the truth. You showed them your strength." Arya's lips curved into a faint smile, her voice weak but steady. "Not alone," she whispered. "Never alone." Daniel's chest tightened, his eyes stung with emotion. He squeezed her hand gently. "That's right, never alone. The machines beside them hummed with steady rhythm. The glow of the cube in Arya's hand shifted colors, golden and warm. It was as if the universe itself was answering her will to live. She was no longer just surviving by his care. She was fighting with her own strength. The turning point had come. The girl who had been abandoned was no longer waiting for death. She was standing, even if weak, against those who left her behind. And at her side, one human stood as proof that hope was stronger than despair. Together they had changed the ending. Together they had begun something the council could not ignore. As the night returned, Daniel whispered, "You are not a lost cause, Arya. You are the reason I believe humans were meant to be here." Her eyes closed, resting peacefully, her hand still holding his, and in that moment, Daniel knew. The battle was not over, but the war had already shifted. The human and the alien girl had turned the tide, and nothing would ever be the same again. The council could no longer ignore the whispers. What began as quiet gossip had now spread through every hall of the hospital. The human worker, Daniel, had saved the girl they had abandoned. The alien doctors, once so certain in their science, now avoided speaking of her case. And the guards who once threatened him walked in silence whenever they passed his room. Inside, however, a different story was unfolding. Arya was growing stronger each day. Her voice, though still soft, could now form clear words. Her hands, once too weak to lift, could now hold the glowing cube without trembling. Her eyes, once filled with despair, now shone with quiet fire. Daniel never left her side. He still fed her carefully, still whispered encouragement, still worked through the nights, but now he was not only keeping her alive, he was watching her reclaim life piece by piece. Each small victory felt like a miracle. When she sat up for the first time, her hands trembling but steady, Daniel smiled with tears in his eyes. "You're winning," he whispered. "You're really winning." Arya looked at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You believed," she whispered, "when no one did." Daniel nodded, his voice heavy with emotion. "Because hope doesn't die unless we let it." Word of her recovery reached beyond the hospital walls. Visitors came quietly, curious to see the girl who had been left to die but now lived. They saw the human at her side, not a doctor, not a healer, but someone who simply refused to give up. Some shook their heads in disbelief, some lowered their eyes in shame, and some began to wonder if perhaps the human way of seeing life carried something their science had forgotten. The council, proud and unwilling to admit failure, summoned Daniel. He entered their chamber, standing tall though tired. They looked down at him with cold eyes. "You broke our rules," one said. "You disobeyed our command." Daniel met their gaze, his voice steady. "I saved a life you left to die. If that is disobedience, then I accept it." The chamber grew silent. The council members exchanged uncertain looks. None of them could deny what Arya's survival meant. She was living proof that their system was flawed, and that a single human with nothing but will and kindness had succeeded where they had failed. Back in the hospital room, Arya spoke more clearly each day. She told Daniel stories of her childhood, her home, her people. Though her voice was fragile, her words were filled with light. Daniel listened with patience, smiling softly. "You are more than a patient, Arya," he said gently. "You are a fighter, and you've shown them what true strength looks like." One afternoon, as the room filled with golden light, Arya stood for the first time, leaning on Daniel's arm, her body shaking but unbroken. The machines beeped in steady rhythm, but for the first time she was not tied to them. She took a step, then another, each one small but filled with triumph. Tears glistened in Daniel's eyes as he whispered, "I told you. You could do it." News of her walking spread quickly. The staff who once mocked now stood silent. The doctors, who left her now, watched from afar, unable to meet her gaze. And the guards who once tried to remove Daniel lowered their heads in respect, for they knew the truth. The human had been right all along. Arya, still weak but alive, stood before them one evening, her voice soft but strong. "You left me," she said to the doctors. "You gave me no hope. Her eyes turned to Daniel, but he stayed, he gave me life. The words cut through the hall. No one could speak against them. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. She is alive not because of great machines or advanced cures, but because no one should ever be abandoned, not while breath remains. He looked at the crowd, his eyes sharp. This is what it means to be human, to fight for life even when all hope is gone. The silence that followed was deep. In that silence, something began to change, not just in the hospital, but in the hearts of those who listened. A seed of doubt grew in their pride, and with it, a seed of hope. Days turned into weeks. Arya grew stronger, walking more, speaking more. She laughed softly at Daniel's simple earth stories, her voice no longer heavy with despair. The bond between them was no longer fragile. It had become unshakable, born in pain, grown in defiance, and shining in victory. And when the time came for her to leave the hospital, she stood tall, still leaning slightly on Daniel's arm, but alive. Before stepping out, she looked back once more, her voice steady, her words echoing through the halls. When hope died, one human gave it back. Daniel smiled, his heart full. To him, he had done nothing extraordinary, only what any human should do. But to Arya, and to those who witnessed her survival, it was a legacy, a story that would live long after the machines were silent. A reminder that sometimes the greatest strength does not come from science or power, it comes from the human refusal to give up. And so their story spread, whispered first in quiet corners, then spoken aloud in crowded halls, the story of the girl left to die, and the human who refused to leave her. The story that taught many that hope is not weakness, it is survival. And in that story, humanity had shown once again why it was special. The legacy of hope had begun, not in a council chamber, not in a laboratory, but in the quiet will of one human heart. And because of that, no one would ever forget that sometimes one human was enough to change everything.